What if I told you that some of the world's most powerful royals married partners who were decades younger than them? We're not talking about 5 or 10 years here. We're talking 20, 30, even over 40 years of age difference. From teenage brides to elderly kings, these royal marriages will make your jaw drop. 1. Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi. Let's start with something relatively tame to ease you in. Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi have an age gap of just 5 years. Born in 1988 and 1983, respectively, this modern royal couple proves that not all royal marriages involve shocking age differences. Beatrice, the granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, married Edoardo in a beautiful, intimate ceremony in 2020. What makes their relationship special is how normal it is compared to the historical standards we're about to explore. 5 years is actually quite common in modern relationships, and their marriage represents how much royal traditions have evolved. Edoardo, an Italian property developer, brought his own son from a previous relationship into their blended family. The couple welcomed their daughter Sienna in 2021, showing that modern royals are creating families based on love rather than political alliances or dynasties. This marriage gives us hope that the days of arranged marriages with massive age gaps are truly behind us. But as we travel back through history, you'll see just how different things used to be. Princess Beatrice's great-great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria would have witnessed some of the shocking unions we're about to discuss. The contrast between then and now is absolutely staggering, and it really makes you appreciate how much society has progressed when it comes to marriage equality and women's rights in relationships. 2. Princess Helena of the United Kingdom and Christian of Schleswig-Holstein. Now let's step back in time to Princess Helena of the United Kingdom and Christian of Schleswig-Holstein, who had a 15-year age gap. Born in 1846 and 1831, respectively, this Victorian-era couple's marriage was typical of the royal arrangements of their time. Princess Helena was Queen Victoria's third daughter, and her mother had very specific plans for her. Unlike her older sisters, who married and moved abroad, Victoria wanted Helena to stay close to home. So when Christian came along, despite being 15 years older, he seemed like the perfect choice because he was willing to live in England. Christian wasn't the most glamorous choice for a princess. He was a minor German prince without much wealth or a significant kingdom, but what he offered was something Queen Victoria valued more: proximity. Helena could continue to be her mother's companion and helper while still fulfilling her duty to marry and produce heirs. The couple actually had a relatively happy marriage by royal standards. They had 6 children together and remained devoted to each other throughout their lives. Christian supported Helena's charitable works, and she became known for her nursing advocacy and women's rights activism. This marriage shows us that even with a significant age gap, mutual respect and shared values could create a stable royal partnership. However, it's important to remember that Helena had limited choice in the matter. Her mother essentially chose her husband based on convenience, which was completely normal for royal daughters of that era. 3. Lady Kitty Spencer and Michael Lewis. Hold onto your hats because Lady Kitty Spencer and Michael Lewis have a massive 32-year age gap. Lady Kitty, born in 1990, is the niece of Princess Diana and cousin to Prince William and Prince Harry. She married fashion tycoon Michael Lewis, born in 1958, in a lavish Italian ceremony in 2021. Now, this one stirred up quite a bit of controversy in the media. People couldn't help but notice that Michael is actually older than Kitty's own father. The South African businessman had been married 3 times before and has grown children who are closer to Kitty's age than he is. But here's the thing about modern royal-adjacent marriages. They're based on personal choice, not political necessity. Kitty is a successful model and socialite in her own right. She's not dependent on this marriage for survival or status like historical royal brides were. She chose Michael freely, and that's a crucial difference from the arranged marriages we'll discuss later. Their wedding was absolutely spectacular, held at a 17th century fortress in Rome. Kitty wore multiple designer gowns, and the guest list included celebrities and aristocrats from around the world. The couple splits their time between London and other luxury locations worldwide. Critics have questioned the age difference, but supporters argue that Kitty is an adult who made her own choice. Unlike the teenage brides forced into marriages centuries ago, she entered this relationship with full agency and awareness. Still, the 32-year gap definitely raises eyebrows and shows that even in modern times, significant age differences in relationships continue to fascinate and sometimes concern the public. 4. Edward II and Isabella of France. Prepare yourself because this one is genuinely disturbing by modern standards. Edward II and Isabella of France had a 12-year age gap, which doesn't sound too shocking until you learn that Isabella was only 12 years old when they married in 1308. Edward was 24. Let me be crystal clear. By today's standards, this would be completely unacceptable and illegal. Isabella was literally a child bride, and this was considered perfectly normal for medieval royalty. The marriage was a political alliance between England and France, and nobody asked young Isabella what she wanted. The marriage turned out to be absolutely miserable for both parties. Edward II was far more interested in his male favorites than his young wife, particularly Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. Isabella spent years being ignored and humiliated at court while she was still just a teenager trying to navigate an adult world. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Isabella eventually grew up to become one of the most formidable queens in English history. She returned to France, raised an army, invaded England with her lover Roger Mortimer, overthrew her husband, and ruled as regent for her young son. She became known as the She-Wolf of France for her fierce determination and political cunning. 5. King Charles III and Princess Diana. Now we come to one that many of you will remember. King Charles III and Princess Diana had a 12-year age gap. Charles was 32 and Diana was just 20 when they married in 1981 in what was called the wedding of the century. This marriage captivated the world, but behind the fairy tale facade was a troubled relationship that would eventually end in tragedy. Diana was barely out of her teenage years when she married into one of the world's most scrutinized families. Charles, already in his 30s, had been pressured to find a suitable bride and produce heirs. The age gap might not seem enormous by historical standards, but the maturity difference between a 20-year-old and a 32-year-old is huge. Diana later revealed in interviews that she felt completely unprepared for royal life. She was thrown into an intense spotlight while still figuring out who she was as a person. Adding to the complexity was Charles's ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, whom he had loved before Diana and would eventually marry after Diana's death. Diana once famously said there were 3 people in this marriage, highlighting the emotional distance created by Charles's attachment to Camilla. The couple had 2 sons, William and Harry, before separating in 1992 and divorcing in 1996. Diana's tragic death in 1997 shocked the world and led to massive public mourning. Many people felt that Diana had been failed by the royal institution and by a husband who couldn't give her the love she deserved. 6. King Hussein of Jordan and Queen Noor. King Hussein of Jordan and Queen Noor had a 16-year age gap, with Hussein being 43 and Noor just 27 when they married in 1978. What makes this marriage particularly interesting is that it was based on genuine love rather than political necessity. Queen Noor, born Lisa Halaby, was an American-born woman of Syrian descent who met King Hussein while working on development projects in Jordan. Unlike traditional arranged royal marriages, theirs was a romance that crossed cultural boundaries and brought together East and West. The age difference didn't seem to matter to the couple, who by all accounts had a deeply loving relationship until Hussein's death in 1999. Noor embraced her role as Queen of Jordan with incredible dedication, learning Arabic, converting to Islam, and becoming a powerful advocate for education, women's rights, and peace in the Middle East. They had 4 children together, and Noor supported Hussein through the political challenges of ruling a Middle Eastern kingdom during turbulent times. Hussein had been married 3 times before meeting Noor, but many observers noted that his 4th marriage seemed to be his happiest. What's remarkable about this union is how it demonstrates that age gaps in royal marriages began to take on a different character in the late 20th century. This wasn't about a teenage girl being forced to marry an older king for political reasons. These were 2 adults who chose each other and built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared vision. 7. Princess Caroline of Monaco and Philippe Junot. Princess Caroline of Monaco and Philippe Junot had a 17-year age gap, and this is one of those royal marriages that was doomed from the start. Caroline was just 21 when she married the 38-year-old Parisian playboy in 1978, much to her parents' dismay. Prince Rainier and Princess Grace, the former Grace Kelly, were not happy about this match. They could see that Junot was wrong for their daughter, but Caroline was headstrong and in love, or at least, she thought she was in love with the sophisticated older man who represented a glamorous world far from the conservative Monaco court. The marriage lasted less than 2 years before Caroline sought an annulment. Junot's playboy lifestyle didn't change after marriage, and Caroline quickly realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The divorce was messy and public, playing out in European tabloids to Caroline's great embarrassment. This marriage is a cautionary tale about the dangers of significant age gaps when the younger partner is still very young. At 21, Caroline was legally an adult, but still developing emotionally and mentally. Junot, at 38, was set in his ways and uninterested in changing his lifestyle for a young bride. Caroline would go on to marry twice more, and her subsequent marriages were more successful. She married Stefano Casaraghi, with whom she had 3 children, before his tragic death in a boat racing accident. She later married Prince Ernst August of Hanover. Through all these relationships, Caroline has maintained her dignity and position as one of European royalty's most elegant figures. 8. Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. Henry VIII appears again, this time with Jane Seymour, who had a 16-year age gap with the king. Henry was born in 1491, Jane in 1508. Jane became Henry's 3rd wife after the dramatic execution of Anne Boleyn in 1536. Jane was quite different from the vivacious Anne Boleyn. She was quiet, submissive, and represented everything the Tudor court believed a proper queen should be. After the drama and alleged adultery accusations against Anne Boleyn, Henry wanted a wife who would be obedient and give him the son he so desperately needed. And Jane did exactly that. In 1537, she gave birth to Prince Edward, the male heir Henry had been waiting decades to have. The king was absolutely ecstatic. He finally had his legitimate son, and Jane had accomplished what Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn could not. Tragically, Jane died just 12 days after giving birth, likely from puerperal fever, a common infection after childbirth in those days. Henry was genuinely devastated by her death. He wore black mourning clothes for months, and when he died years later, he was buried beside Jane rather than any of his other 5 wives. The age gap in this marriage meant that Jane had grown up knowing Henry as her king. She understood exactly what was expected of her and played her role perfectly. Some historians argue she was shrewd and calculated, while others suggest she was genuinely modest and dutiful. Either way, Jane Seymour remains unique among Henry's wives. She gave him what no other wife could, and she died before the relationship could sour. In Henry's mind, she was his true wife, which says a lot about how he valued women primarily for their ability to produce male heirs. 9. King Albert of Monaco and Princess Charlene. King Albert of Monaco and Princess Charlene have a 19-year age gap, with Albert born in 1958 and Charlene in 1978. This modern royal marriage has been surrounded by rumors and speculation since the beginning, making it one of the more controversial unions on our list. Charlene was a South African Olympic swimmer when she met Prince Albert in 2000. They dated for nearly a decade before getting engaged in 2010. Their lavish wedding in 2011 was watched by millions around the world, but even then, there were whispers that all was not well. Reports surfaced that Charlene had tried to flee Monaco multiple times before the wedding, allegedly having her passport confiscated. While the palace firmly denied these rumors, Charlene always appeared uncomfortable and often tearful during the wedding festivities. Some observers noted she looked more like she was attending a funeral than celebrating her marriage. The age gap between them represents more than just years. Albert had lived a playboy lifestyle for decades and had 2 illegitimate children from previous relationships. Charlene, nearly 20 years younger, was an athlete used to discipline and focus, not the protocol and scrutiny of royal life. They have since had twins, Prince Jacques and Princess Gabriella, born in 2014. However, the marriage continues to be plagued by separation rumors. Charlene has spent extended periods away from Monaco, officially for medical and personal reasons, fueling constant speculation about the state of their relationship. This marriage demonstrates that even in modern times, significant age gaps combined with the pressures of royal life can create difficult circumstances, especially when the younger partner may not have fully understood what they were getting into. 10. Henry VIII and Catherine Parr. Henry VIII strikes again. His sixth and final wife was Catherine Parr, and they had a 21-year age gap. Henry was born in 1491 and Catherine in 1512. When they married in 1543, Henry was 52 and Catherine was 31. By this point, Henry V was not the athletic, handsome young king who had married Catherine of Aragon decades earlier. He was morbidly obese, had a festering leg wound that never healed, and was increasingly paranoid and tyrannical. Catherine Parr was essentially walking into a nightmare situation. What makes Catherine remarkable is that she was a mature, educated woman who had already been widowed twice before marrying Henry. She knew exactly what she was getting into and approached the marriage with strategic intelligence. Rather than trying to be a romantic partner to the aging, ill king, she became more of a nurse and companion. Catherine was actually in love with Thomas Seymour, Jane Seymour's brother, when Henry decided he wanted to marry her. She couldn't refuse a king's proposal, so she had to set aside her own romantic desires and marry Henry instead. Talk about a sacrifice. Amazingly, Catherine survived Henry VIII, which was no small feat considering he had executed 2 wives and divorced 2 others. She successfully navigated the dangerous Tudor court by being intelligent, tactful, and careful, never to threaten Henry's authority or beliefs too openly. After Henry's death in 1547, Catherine finally got to marry Thomas Seymour, the man she had loved all along. Sadly, she died in childbirth just a year later at age 35. The age gap with Henry meant she spent her prime years caring for an elderly, difficult king rather than living the life she wanted. 11. Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves. We're back with Henry VIII, yes again, and Anne of Cleves, who had a 24-year age gap. Henry was born in 1491 and Anne in 1515. This marriage is famous for being the most hilarious disaster in Tudor history. Henry had been widowed when Jane Seymour died, and his advisors convinced him he needed another wife for political reasons. They arranged a marriage with Anne, a German princess based primarily on a flattering portrait painted by Hans Holbein. Henry was excited about his beautiful new bride and couldn't wait to meet her. The problem? When Anne arrived in England in January 1540, Henry took one look at her and was absolutely horrified. He complained that she looked nothing like her portrait and privately called her a Flanders mare, basically calling her a horse. The 24-year age gap meant nothing compared to Henry's shallow disappointment in her appearance. Despite his revulsion, Henry went through with the marriage for political reasons, but he couldn't bring himself to consummate it. He told his physicians that Anne's body disgusted him and he couldn't perform his husbandly duties. Imagine being Anne in a foreign country with a husband who openly found you repulsive. The marriage was annulled after just 6 months, making it Henry's shortest marriage. But here's where the story gets better. Anne was probably thrilled with this outcome. She agreed to the annulment immediately, and Henry rewarded her generosity with castles, money, and the title kings. Beloved sister, Anne spent the rest of her life living comfortably in England, outliving Henry and all his other wives. She never had to deal with the pressures of being queen or risk execution like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Sometimes losing a husband with a big age gap is the best thing that can happen. 12. James II and Mary of Modena. Get ready for one of the most disturbing entries on this list. James II and Mary of Modena had a 25-year age gap. James was 40 years old when he married 15-year-old Mary in 1673. Yes, you read that correctly. She was 15. Mary of Modena was an Italian princess who had actually wanted to become a nun. Instead, she was forced into marriage with James, Duke of York, who would later become King James II of England. She cried throughout the proxy marriage ceremony in Italy and cried again when she met her much older husband in England. The age difference was shocking, even by 17th century standards. Mary was still essentially a child when she became Duchess of York and stepmother to James's 2 grown daughters from his first marriage, Mary and Anne. His daughters were closer to Mary's age than James was. Despite this terrible beginning, the marriage eventually became relatively stable. Mary gave birth to numerous children, though most died in infancy. Only one son, James Francis Edward, survived to adulthood. The birth of this Catholic male heir actually triggered the Glorious Revolution of 1688 because Protestant England refused to accept a Catholic succession. Mary grew into a dignified queen who was known for her piety and charity. When James was overthrown and they fled to exile in France, she remained loyal to him until his death. She survived him by many years, living in France as a respected dowager queen. This marriage shows the cruel reality for many royal brides. They had absolutely no choice in their fate. A teenage girl who wanted a religious life was instead forced to marry a man old enough to be her father, bear his children, and watch most of them die. 13. Henry VIII and Catherine Howard. Here it is, the one I promised you at the beginning. Henry VIII and Catherine Howard had a staggering 30-year age gap. Henry was around 49 years old, and Catherine was just 19 when they married in 1540. This marriage is wild for so many reasons. First, Catherine was young enough to be Henry's granddaughter. Second, she was Anne Boleyn's first cousin, so Henry literally married and then executed two cousins. Third, this was right after his disaster with Anne of Cleves, so Henry was experiencing a midlife crisis of epic proportions. Catherine was beautiful, vivacious, and full of life. Henry, now hugely overweight, with a disgusting leg ulcer, was completely infatuated with her. He called her his rose without a thorn and showered her with jewels and gifts. He actually thought this teenager was in love with him. But Catherine was still basically a kid who had been thrust into the role of queen. She had probably been sexually abused by her music teacher as a young teen, and she'd had previous relationships with young men her own age. When she became queen, those young men came back into her life at court. Catherine made the fatal mistake of continuing romantic relationships with younger courtiers, particularly Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham. Whether she actually committed adultery is debated by historians, but at the very least, she was indiscreet. When Henry found out, he was absolutely devastated. In 1542, Catherine Howard was executed for adultery and treason. She was only about 21 years old. The 30-year age gap meant that Catherine was basically a child married to an elderly, paranoid tyrant. This marriage ended in tragedy, just like Anne Boleyn's before her. 14. Prince Johannes von Thurn, Untaxis, and Princess Gloria. Prince Johannes von Thurn, Untaxis, and Princess Gloria had a remarkable 34-year age gap. Johannes was 53 years old, and Gloria was just 19 when they married in 1980. This is one of the wildest modern royal marriages you've ever heard of. The Thurn-Untaxis family is one of the wealthiest in Europe, with a fortune built on postal services dating back centuries. When young Gloria married Prince Johannes, she became part of one of Germany's most important aristocratic families. But nobody expected what would happen next. Johannes died just 10 years after their marriage, leaving Gloria as a 30-year-old widow with 3 young children and an enormous estate to manage. Some people thought the young widow would fade into obscurity. They were very wrong. Princess Gloria transformed herself into Princess TNT, her initials, becoming famous for her punk rock style, wild parties, and business acumen. She wore leather, partied at nightclubs, and once posed for Vanity Fair in a bathtub filled with diamonds. She was unlike any royal widow anyone had ever seen. Despite her party girl image, Gloria was actually brilliant at managing the family fortune. She took a struggling estate and turned it into a profitable enterprise, saving the family from financial ruin. She proved that young wives in age-gap marriages aren't always victims or gold diggers. Sometimes they're capable women ready to take on the world. The 34-year age gap meant that Gloria's marriage was relatively brief, but it positioned her to become one of the most successful and unconventional aristocrats in modern European history. She used her position and wealth to live life on her own terms, breaking every rule about how a proper royal widow should behave. 15. Count Leonard Bernadotte of Wisborg and Sonia. Count Leonard Bernadotte of Wisborg and Sonia also had a 35-year age gap. Leonard was 63 years old and Sonia was just 28 when they married in 1972. This Swedish royal marriage shows that massive age gaps continued well into the modern era. Count Leonard had actually given up his succession rights to the Swedish throne decades earlier when he married a commoner in 1932. That Marriage ended in divorce and he remarried twice more before meeting Sonia, so Sonia was actually his fourth wife, which adds another layer of complexity to this situation. Sonia was a German television presenter when she met the aging Count. Their marriage raised eyebrows, not just because of the age difference, but because Leonard was already a great-grandfather when they wed. He had children older than Sonia and grandchildren not much younger than her. Despite the unconventional circumstances, the marriage lasted until Leonard's death in 2004. That's over 30 years together, which is longer than many marriages between people of similar ages. Sonia became Countess Sonia and took on royal duties with dignity. This marriage challenges our assumptions about age gap relationships. While we might initially be skeptical about a 26-year-old marrying a 61-year-old, they built a lasting partnership that endured until death. It makes you wonder, at what point does age become just a number? Of course, we should acknowledge that Sonia was a fully grown adult when she made this choice. Unlike many of the child brides we've discussed, she entered this marriage with her eyes open, understanding exactly who she was marrying and what the situation entailed. 16. Prince Hendrik of the Netherlands and Princess Marie of Prussia. Now we're getting into the really shocking territory. Prince Hendrik of the Netherlands and Princess Marie of Prussia had a 35-year age gap. The Dutch royal family has always been somewhat progressive by royal standards, but this marriage shows that even they weren't immune to the practice of arranging marriages with huge age differences. These unions were almost always about political alliances and dynastic concerns rather than personal compatibility. Prince Hendrik was part of the Dutch royal family during a time when marriages were carefully orchestrated to maintain power and create alliances with other European royal houses. Princess Marie came from the powerful Prussian royal line, making this marriage strategically valuable, regardless of the personal feelings of those involved. What's particularly striking about these 35-year age gaps is how they were simply accepted as normal. Nobody questioned whether a young woman should marry a man old enough to be her father or even grandfather. The personal happiness of royal brides was considered completely irrelevant compared to the political benefits of the match. We don't have extensive personal accounts from Marie about her feelings toward this marriage, which is unfortunately common for royal women of earlier centuries. Their private thoughts and emotions were rarely recorded or considered important. They were expected to fulfill their duty without complaint, regardless of their age or the age of their husband. This marriage represents the cold, calculated nature of royal matchmaking, where massive age gaps were just another detail to be negotiated along with dowries, territorial agreements, and succession rights. 17. King William IV and Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen. King William IV and Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen had a 37-year age gap. William was 52 years old and Adelaide was just 25 when they married in 1818. William IV became king quite unexpectedly at age 64 when his older brother George IV died without legitimate heirs. Before becoming king, William had lived for over 20 years with an actress named Dorothea Jordan, with whom he had 10 illegitimate children. But because those children were illegitimate, they couldn't inherit the throne. When William's father demanded that he marry someone appropriate and produce legitimate heirs, Adelaide was selected. She was a German princess known for being sensible and dutiful, rather than beautiful or charming. At 25, she was marrying a man old enough to be her father, who already had 10 children older than many of her future stepchildren. Tragically, Adelaide suffered multiple miscarriages and stillbirths. The couple had 2 daughters who both died in infancy. This was devastating for Adelaide and for the succession because it meant William had no legitimate heir. The throne would eventually pass to his niece, who became Queen Victoria. Despite the massive age gap and the tragic loss of their children, William and Adelaide developed a genuine affection for each other. Adelaide was known for her kindness and charity, and William came to deeply appreciate her steady, supportive presence. She was everything his party-loving brothers' wives were not: reliable, moral, and dedicated to duty. The 37-year age gap meant that their marriage was relatively brief before William's death in 1837. Adelaide lived another 12 years as the Dowager Queen, respected and beloved by the public for her charitable works. What did you think of this list? Which royal marriage shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating royal history content.